Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Everyone could take their seats. This is a very unusual evening for a number of reasons. Number one, we're starting on time, which I greatly appreciate. Number two, a lot of RSVPs, I would say 90%, sorry for those who didn't, but 90% RSVP, which is great. Number three, it's a great honor for us to have somebody who's at the helm of one of our great cultural institutions. It's something very special for us, and I think that it's, we all love the Museum of Fine Arts, and many of us are members or go there, but it's also something very exciting to have an inside view of what goes on. So we thank Pierre Terjanian for coming to speak with us today. He was appointed Anne and Graham Gunn Director and CEO of the MFA after working at the museum as the Chief of Curatorial Affairs and Conservation for about a year and a half. He's an experienced fundraiser, but he's also an important scholar on arms and armor, and previously worked curatorially at one of the other great museums of the world, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And by the way, before I go on, I should mention, for those who don't know me, I'm Aram Arkun. I'm the Executive Director of the Tekeyan Cultural Association of the US and Canada. And this event is sponsored also by our local Boston chapter of Tekeyan. We have a very hard-working executive who have, among other things, put together a very nice reception afterwards for us. And we have all kinds of events. We had recently the UCLA VEM Ensemble Quartet here in Boston, so we have a variety of different cultural events. I hope if you guys like this event or you want to support our activities, and keep in mind we also are a sponsor of the Armenian Mirror-Spectator newspaper, so if you want to support us for any of those reasons or all of those reasons, it'd be greatly appreciated. We have some envelopes and material outside and in the back. In any case, after that commercial interruption, I'll go back. And also support the MFA, because it also is, as I said, a very important institution for us. So founded in 1870 with nearly 500,000 works of art from ancient to very modern, the MFA is the 5th largest museum in the US in terms of gallery space, and one of the 20 largest in the world. I hope I'm right on those figures.
We accept it.
Thank you. Okay. So I want to start off by just asking you, aside from its size, what really makes it special? Is it kind of an encyclopedic museum, as some call it, or what is it that's unique about the MFA?
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you all for being here tonight, and I'm so honored and delighted to have been invited. So just want to acknowledge and thank you for this introduction. What makes the MFA special is in part where it is. It's just not anywhere. It's in Boston, it's in Massachusetts, and it's I would think it's one of the gems of the city, but it is also one of these many examples of great accomplishments that were made entirely possible by civic philanthropy. It was built over 156 years through the generosity of collectors, donors, philanthropists. It receives next to no money from the federal government, for government entities in general. So this is was always meant as to be a community builder and to be of service to the community. It is a museum that wanted to be encyclopedic. I don't know that any museum in the world has just everything, but it is also a museum that has character, because very early on it invested very heavily in certain directions. And the collection of Asian art is absolutely sublime. The collection of Japanese art is better than what you can find in Japan under a single roof, because in Japan things are very segmented. And it has other areas of strength, including all kinds of archaeological work we did with Harvard in Sudan, in Egypt, and elsewhere. But of course we're collecting modern and contemporary, so it's also a museum continues to reinvent itself.
Thank you. As the effect of COVID was very intense on all kinds of different institutions, and not just the United States, but throughout the world. And at the beginning of this year, still the visitor and membership numbers are below the pre-COVID period, while expenses have increased. In January, you announced that the museum is facing a $13 million projected deficit, which forced a layoff of some employees, but that only partially alleviated the deficit. Are things better now, or how are you sort of dealing with this complicated situation? Are you able to get increased support from the community to kind of make up for this?
Thank you. So yes, we have a structural deficit that would only get bigger every year because it's expenses that grow faster than any revenue that we have access to. And therefore it was urgent that we would take some measures. We've given ourselves 3 years to go back to a break-even budget. This requires a lot of discipline, and it requires a lot of ingenuity. We have to evolve the museum. Part of the solution is definitely going to come from philanthropy, but we also are shifting away from expense reduction and looking at how we can generate more revenue. Ultimately, it's impossible to be serving the community effectively and to build for the future if you're unstable, so it's essential that we get there. And the board is supporting a plan that I presented before I became director, as soon as it was announced on how we're going to get there. I just presented to our staff this morning what we're doing in fiscal year 27 to get there, to evolve the museum. So it's going to be a long haul, but I'm confident that we're actually going to get there. It just will require us to continue to reimagine how the museum operates and focus on what we consider to be essential to our mission, and focus on how we create even more value around what the museum is about. It's not just a repository of great objects. It's not just a place where you come to look at art. It's a place where you meet with people. It's a place where you can make other kinds of connections. And particularly at this time in the world, it's a place where you can find restorative powers, where you can regenerate, where you can leave some of your sorrows at the door, and when you can leave feeling more confident and also taking perspective. So I think articulating in part what this museum already is, but what it's going to be more of, is one of the ways that we're going to do that.
Sounds exciting. The Samsung art store collaborated with the MFA at the end of last year, making select works by Winslow Homer available as 4K reproductions. Will technological developments, including digital reproductions like this, virtual reality, and AI, lessen the significance of museums by making it easier to access great works of art and exhibitions in the comfort of people's homes? Or do you think that making art more widely accessible will actually entice more people to actually come to the museum for the in-person experience?
Thank you. Another great question. We're not turning our back to technology, and we do believe that part of our mission is to create access to the collection. Not everybody can come to the MFA, and so digitization and the dematerialization of the art is one of the ways we can get there. However, we will not be able to compete successfully with the metaverse. More and more objects will be high resolution, accessible to you. You can manipulate those objects. You may be able to go inside them, right? All those things are not physically possible. So, in my view, you do not come to the museum to compete with these images. You come to the museum to be in presence of the originals. You come there to have an emotional response and not just understanding how an object is presented and who are you going with to see this object matters. I believe in the human touch, so we need to have a combination of spectacular experiential displays, but also the presence of a fellow human being who will surpass the apps, I guarantee it. In reading your interest, in infusing their storytelling with their personal experiences, and that's why I'm thinking that our volunteers, for example, are one of the ways that we're going to provide something that is unique, that is special. We will not, again, turn our back to technology, but it has its rightful place. And what we don't want is just to turn the museum into a data bank.
That's a very good answer. I also, somewhat related to that, I just noticed, according to the Boston Globe, that the MFA is partnering with KM, the maker of Fenway Franks, for a series of AI updated Revolutionary War era paintings with hot dogs in them. And so the museum isn't getting any money for this collaboration apparently. So is the expectation basically greater attention? In other words, it's sort of an advertising gimmick, or is there some other aspect of it involved?
Yeah, it's not a gimmick. We like to be of service whenever we can, and museums oftentimes take themselves very seriously. And one of the challenges of a museum like ours is the architecture is neoclassical for the most part. The experience of entering the museum, it's almost like a stately progression. Some of us are very comfortable with that. Others find this very intimidating, this threshold, how you come to the museum. So things like this, we did not alter our own images. We gave permission for our images to be used and altered for marketing purposes. It's one of the ways we can be top of mind without, again, thinking that this is a substitute for the many other ways we can be relevant. So why not? And this is in partnership with what we think is part of our community. It's not so much about advertising. It's just, again, about keeping to ways to open up the museum, having the museum be more present in many different places. It's not a bad thing for the museum to be present in unexpected places.
There's no such thing as bad publicity, as they say, in some ways. So, how does the MFA handle the changing attitude of the federal government towards art and museums, which places institutions in a position of either being forced to comply with restrictions on their programming or relinquishing federal grants?
So historically, the MFA has not been seeking federal support, and government support has always been very limited. It doesn't represent 1% of our operating budget. But it doesn't mean that from time to time we would not turn to the government for supporting exhibition projects, and there are a number of schemes that make that possible. In general, obviously, times are hard for museums. Our revenue is hard. Our endowment is one of the engines of growth. We want to build up our endowment. That's how we can stabilize a museum. So what really is at stake in this instance is what agency do we want to retain when we're basically self-funded? If we're self-funded, are we really going to turn over the review or interpretation, the selection of the objects, the exhibitions program to somebody else? We have fought long and hard, I think, to be where we are with our own means and with the support of the community. And it seemed absurd to compromise that when we were not clear where the expectations might be if we were to seek federal funding. So at this particular time, we're not engaging in actively seeking any federal support. Because again, what is at stake is a museum is a storyteller. And we are no longer credible if we don't control the narrative, and that's an existential question.
I also want to commend you. I noticed that you actually turned down a couple of grants last year, substantial ones from the NEH, out of concern that the certificate of compliance would limit your freedom of expression. So let's turn to what. Talk a little bit about what are the primary duties of a director in your position, and what does a day in the life, in the work life at least, of Pierre Terjanian look like?
I would say that the daily experience is not in keeping with the duties of the director. The duties are so large that all you're doing is trying to live up to those immense responsibilities that one has. So I have both the sort of fiduciary responsibility of running a large organization, keeping it healthy, and ensuring that it's going to be stronger when I ultimately leave, or rather than stronger than the way I found it. But ultimately, it's also about leading the museum and defining the directions that are promising for us. Again, we're a non-profit organization. Our purpose is to provide a service to the community. We need to continually re-examine and reinvent how we engage with audiences. We have younger generations that grow up with technology, and so how do we create this connection with objects that are inanimate, in glass cases and so forth. So part of my job is not so much to have the answers, is to leverage the expertise that is on our board, is to reach out to external partners who have expertise in those areas and who are credible within their own communities, is to tap into our staff, many of whom have deep expertise in certain areas, is to learn from other directors who are running similar institutions and oftentimes have comparable ambitions. It's also about motivating everybody. And so creating the inspiration that's going to give us the momentum is essential. So I've been in the job now for 11 months, so it'll be a whole year. I'm like a toddler, counting every month. But the truth is, I would not have been hired if there was not a plan, a project, a vision for the future of the museum. I shared it with the board. I shared it recently with our board of advisors. I'm sharing with our volunteers this week. And setting a direction is absolutely essential because we live in a world full of uncertainty, and we cannot have just plans. What we need to have is a destination, and then we will navigate the troubled waters and we will get there. But setting the destination, saying this is where we want to be, is what I take very seriously. My role is to support all those who are invested in the museum, and it begins with our staff. So I just announced this morning we got a significant gift from a donor to create professional development for our entire staff. Historically, we have not been able to give them opportunities to be their very best. And there are so many things like that that keep me awake at night. Not because I'm concerned, but because I'm excited about the prospect of building a really strong organization with, and enabling everybody to be at the very best of their game.
And are you able to take lunch during the delivery?
My wife is suggesting I take a walk in the fens, and then I should have, be on the bench, and that doesn't seem very realistic at this time. But yes, I have plenty of lunches because those lunches are typically encounters with prospective new members of our board, with other museum leaders, and also leaders of other cultural organizations. One thing I think is going to be very promising is sort of more interdisciplinary, multisensorial experiences. We have, for example, something we call Art in Tune, when for one night at the museum, you can navigate the entire permanent collection, and you have music that is being played in the different corners of the museum. 2 years ago, we did it with instruments that are normally behind glass, accessioned works of art, and you can hear them sing and perform, and that's really a magical thing. So I'm always looking for how else we can multiply the reasons to come to the museum. It's not just for the visual experience, it's for something richer. And it's ideally to bump into somebody you don't know who's going to be your best friend over time. And the museum is a place for making connections.
Well, you're always on point on your answers, which is good. In an interview last year in the Boston Globe, you spoke, and this is in connection with sort of follow-up with what you were talking about, you spoke about refreshing the MFA's approach to its permanent collection in a way that creates more points of entry for guests. And you said that the museum can do more to explore the emotions behind the objects, both in how they were created and how they were received, in order to generate a broader invitation to engage with the art. So what would be some possible new points of entry? I mean, maybe you already mentioned some, and how much can broader engagement be realized without sacrificing the complexities of context, which often require a fair amount of knowledge on the part of viewers?
So it might come as no surprise that after having been a curator of Arms and Armor for 25 years, I believe in the theater, in theatrics. And the museum, over time, has focused so much on the opportunities to learn from the art that it had possibly gone a bit too far in being didactic. You know, when you come in, you feel that there's a lot of lessons to be learned, but what is at stake is the enjoyment of the art on its own terms. In the process of preparing for a lecture, I ran into a publication from 1916 by the secretary of the MFA. It's a position that doesn't exist anymore, which was the purpose of the art museum. And there was in there a statement which was, Museums, one can disagree with the statement. Museums of science are by nature designed for instruction. It's not about the beauty of science. It's really about the research, the discovery, and the learning, the creation of new knowledge. Art museum ought to be first and foremost about enjoyment, and then comes the learning. And I think there's some virtue in that, which is restoring a visceral, emotional response to works of art. And so that's one lever, and I think we can create a better rhythm in the way you explore the museum. We have some rooms that are fabulous for that, but they just happen to be there. It's not part of a larger plan. Another one is more anthropological exploration of the museum. One challenge of museums: how do you represent everyone? How do you see yourself as your gender or your lived experience in other ways in the museum? And we've been acquiring a lot of works to better represent historically marginalized artists and communities. But we'll never have everybody in the significant numbers. There are certain art forms that you just cannot collect for various reasons. So I'm thinking about the way that the galleries were conceived as a series of cultural islands, so that you can explore that part of the world over time, see their art. But very few of these galleries were developed with an interest in what is happening at the same time in another part of the world. What were the problems that all these civilizations were trying to solve? What does the artist respond to? And there's a real opportunity, in my view, for inviting navigation of the museum, for looking at materials and techniques, and looking at the material, looking at different cultures, and in relation, what it's like to be a maverick and stand out, and what it's like to actually belong. What were the expectations of a society? What were the norms? And who are these people who broke away from that and actually moved the whole society forward? We can think of, at the time of the anniversary of the revolution, of those patriots who took big risks and broke away with what was the normal order of things, which to be subjects to the British Crown. So should we celebrate more those figures through the arts? And I think it's quite possible to do more.
Well, that all sounds very enticing. The museum has kind of taken the lead in returning works of art that have been claimed by either the descendants of their creators. For example, very recently, I think you may have been one of the first museums to return or compensate the descendants of a family of slaves, of an artist who was making art as a slave. And you, I think that might have been the first time. But also you, for decades now, you've returned works that other countries have said were illegitimately obtained. And so how does, is the MFA large enough, its collections are large enough that it can sort of do this? It has the means, the largesse to return quite a bit of things? Or, is there sort of a balance that you have to keep in terms of, are you going to return all the Greek, sculptures and stuff, Turkey and Greece both? How does that work?
So the answer is no, we cannot afford to return everything. But it's not based on our capacity to keep or to return. When you think about where we are as a society, there are so many questions about where do you get information you can trust, and who is acting in good faith. And the future of the museum is to be on high moral grounds. I don't believe we can be credible and we can be inspiring if we're transactional and only self-serving, and therefore it's essential that we bite the bullet and we accept the consequences of being ethical. In some cases we have laws that require us to comply plainly with certain situations. So NACPRA, which is a federal law that governs works by indigenous and native artists, it prescribes the way you have to operate. But in other areas, there's more fluidity, and that was the case in the return of these works by enslaved artists. We are the first, and so far only museum in the United States to have done so. And we follow the analysis that the maker of this work, working under conditions of enslavement, could have not possibly had a saying in keeping the works, in profiting from their sale, and therefore it's a form of coercion. And under the conditions of coercion, there is no possible legal there's no real transfer of title. There is a transfer of title under a sort of legal arrangement, but basically somebody was forced to part with something they were forced to make. And it didn't sit well with us. We had done an exhibition called Hear Me Now, where we explored the question of what does it mean that those works were being made and who has real title to them. And a logical conclusion was to work with the descendants of the family when they knocked at our door, and to do so in partnership. That is, we did that behind closed doors under conditions of strict confidentiality, and we explored what does it look like to get this right. And very much to our pleasure, it was very important to them that the works by David Drake was a very talented potter working in the old Edgefield in South Carolina, that his works would continue to remain in public domain, not all of them, but some, because they tell an important story, and so they wanted to both regain title to the works, but also make it possible for the museum to continue to tell the story. So both things are possible. It's possible to get it right, and it's possible to continue to tell the story. It was not a straightforward road. And yesterday at the MFA, we hosted a university that had a series of legal scholars that were debating whether the learnings from this precedent. And this is just a moving field.
I'd like to turn back to you personally, and if you had to think over your career of a number of decades, what would be, let's say, a couple of your most significant achievements? Perhaps a tough question to think about, but answer this one.
Okay, I think career-wise, I started as a Andrew W. Mellon Fellow at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. It was the first time the Mellon Foundation created fellowships for curators. And so my first accomplishment was to endow my own position. So I had a future. It was important to create the conditions for investing over time in bigger things. But I would say, when I think back, for me the accomplishment is really about touching people's souls and minds, and it's not about the numbers. It's if you ever come to the MFA and you can see how children can have this magical moment, either making art or learning about something, you know it's going to stay with them. And it's not just about children, but we are here to create good and to share it. And I can think of many stories with very small gifts of funds that then led to something that was so much bigger, and going back even to the donor and telling them that they were almost apologetic about how little they had to give, and be able to talk about the impact of the philanthropy. Everything okay? Yeah. There's so many happy moments. So I think that the transformation moment has been to see the scale at which I could do more of that, and that meant abdicating the craft of curating and being a department head, and then thinking more about what are my responsibilities to the larger whole. And one reason I moved into the administrative role and leadership role is I saw mounting questions about what are museums today, how are they funded, how do they invest the funds that they have, who do they serve, is the art that they have looted, are they really for everyone? And I felt that I was in a place where I could not really participate in re-articulating the value of the museum in society. And it was not so much personal ambition, it was really thinking about all the talented curators, conservators, and other museum professionals that I've rubbed elbows with all those decades. And I know how hard they're working, how much they want to accomplish. I felt actually I could be there to give them more traction and making sure that their efforts would not be in vain. And so the real ambition is even beyond the MFA, is to making sure that museums have a bright future and that art museums are providing a service that is valued.
Thank you. I'll accept that. Do you also, you've spoken about this before, but two questions. First of all, how did you end up choosing this as a profession? It's, it's not something that most people start out in life deciding they're going to do. And in fact, it wasn't something that you started out deciding you were going to do. And so after all these years, living in New York, have you become a Bostonian?
I'm working on my intonation, and I think, is it fair to ask the room if you could raise your hand, those among you who are currently having or had the profession that you knew you would have when you were 16? Not too many, not too many. So we all have a journey. I think everybody's journey is just as exciting as mine. I've had the good fortune of being educated in France, and I got fellowships, but for the most part, education was very affordable. And so it gave me the chance to continue to think about what I really wanted and how I could have an impact and turn away from what had been groomed to do. So I went to law school, I didn't become a lawyer. I went to business school. I'm not much of a businessman. But ultimately, all of these things led me to where I am today. And one reason that I came to the United States, and I still have deep gratitude to this country, is I was really given an opportunity. I was given the benefit of doubt. I was very suspicious with my checkered evolution. Are you really going to be a museum professional? But I was given a chance to prove myself, and I feel that I have to earn back that trust every day. And it's a beautiful thing when you're given opportunities to continue to explore. So that's what drives me. That's what I want for everyone. Yes, hopefully I've answered your question.
Yes. Interesting to see how the different paths we take in our lives. Speaking of which, I think a lot of people might be curious to learn about the Terjanian part of your background. Because, of course, we have a special audience here who would be very interested in that.
I grew up in the part of France where there are no Armenians. Virtually none. So when I grew up, everybody said, what is this name and what is the story? My parents themselves, my father who gave me this name, didn't have much to say either because he was born in Paris. I have a photograph of him in the arms of the GIs who had liberated Paris, 1944. He's there, but he himself was not born in Armenia, and he was born from an Alsatian mother who was a maid in Paris. And his father, who came from Kayseri, and was one of the very few survivors who made it to France of the family. And he made the call, I think when he came he was about 12. He made the call to assimilate. And so did not maintain the language, did not pass it on, did not marry a Roman Catholic, and my father married a Lutheran woman, so you see how complicated it gets very quickly. But therefore, I didn't grow up as part of the diaspora, but it's not possible to have a name like this and to have a grandfather who was a carpet dealer, a Persian carpet dealer, and a father who was a carpet dealer, and not think sometimes about roots. And I've always been very intrigued, and it led me to a journey of expression. I should also tell you a quick anecdote. For 12 years I was a boxer. And one time the referee gave me a big hug after, which is not conventional. And he said, an Armenian, I'm Armenian as well. And so there are these sort of chance encounters that really remind you of things that bind people together. Coming to the United States was actually probably the greatest exposure I've had to Armenian community and community building. I didn't have access to that in France as much. Paris does. So I would say it's been a sort of slow discovery, but it's not possible also to have this identity and not have deep sensitivities. Right? So I'm very interested in history. I'm interested in ebb and flow, I'm interested in displacement, I'm interested in resilience. And I also understand how art and cultural artifacts are important as a way of reaffirming, right, the existence and the genius of individual peoples. So that's one of the reasons that perhaps I became so interested in art, because it's more than just the work of a single creator. It tells you a lot about the place in which it was made and for whom it was made, and about relationships. And many of these objects change hands and traveled. We talked about provenance. That's not always the most fun part about that. But sometimes it's also gifts, and the gifts tell you a lot also about the fabric of societies in which these works were made.
Thank you. I think we have to connect you back to the Armenian community here. But I'd also like to ask you maybe if you could highlight a few of the significant parts of the MFA collection that would pertain to Armenians. I mean, I know it's not specifically big in that area, but nonetheless you do have some things which are, I think, significant of interest, if you'd like to comment.
Yes, and I would venture to say we probably have some undiscovered works. Yes. Because with 500,000 objects, it's always a work in progress to confirm attributions, and you often need an outside scholar to come and say, wait a minute, this looks like this other piece, and this piece definitely came from that part of the world. But we obviously have an Arshil Gorky painting that is currently on view in our recently reopened modern art galleries. And it could be shown almost as a sort of an Armenian work, but it's actually also showing how an Armenian work, it fits into a larger story and shapes a larger story about modern art. So I think our privilege as an American museum is that we can always, we can follow identities, and we can have national, and we can also tell the story of nations. We also have the luxury of talking about how exchange, confluences, provide enrichment and spark creativity. So it's really nice for us to talk about modern art holistically. We have an extraordinary 6 meters wide, I don't know how many feet that is, but that's way too many feet. 6 meters wide altar curtain, or like a hanging, which is beautifully painted. I've not seen it. I've seen a photograph of it, which is 19th century Armenian. That is very beautiful. And we don't even have the space to examine it. The storage is pretty much full. But that's an object I would like to see displayed at some point. I'm really going to look for a good excuse to pull it out. But we also have ancient things. So we have some objects from Urartu in the ancient Near East galleries. We have a lot of work by Yusuf Karsh, which I've heard of. And beyond that, there are other kinds of works. We have a recent acquisition. Maybe you look like you were in on this. By Martin Borushan. So this is very important to us because it relates not only to a great work of art that has a context in the world of abstraction and almost as part of a movement, but it's also somebody who went to the School Museum of Fine Arts, so it's close to home. And this was just acquired by the museum. We have not even done a press release, so this is sort of prime new information. But we don't want to miss an opportunity to continue to build up our holdings, and particularly when they are not just representative, but when they speak uniquely to something that is part of Boston. Right? We could be a museum for everyone about everything. But ultimately, we're in Boston, we're for Boston, and these objects are particularly meaningful when they were collected by someone here, donated by someone here, when they were made by somebody who gained something here. And we're always wondering how we can be more than just a great large museum, one of the 20 largest museum in the world, but a museum that you will remember because it has some unique traits. It's like meeting a person that is good at everything, and likes everything. You really want to have a conversation with that person. I think a person that has lived experience, has traits, character, temperament, is potentially more interesting. I think our museum needs to cultivate its character. Eccentricity sometimes has its merit.
I think maybe one last question, and we'll turn it, I think our audience may have some questions for you too, but are there any ways that you might think the MFA would be able to specifically engage or work with the Armenian community here? I mean, projects, or does anything come to mind, or is it something still? I mean, obviously, like Metropolitan Museum had a great exhibit, Armenia, which was a very broad exhibit, and you were there when it happened, with Evans and others. But is there any possibility of something? Obviously, you have planned way ahead of time all of your projects and exhibitions, but is there anything that you could think of?
Well, the best projects are done with strong partners, and oftentimes when it comes to our exhibitions, it comes because there's an encounter with another organization or with a collector or someone who brings the initial spark, and then we can take it from there and build it up. When it comes to working with the Armenian community, I come here with great humility. You heard about how thin my heritage is, and to some degree, and I would like to spend time with the Armenian community before we decide what direction it should take. But one thing that I think is essential, and you would like to share, is that traditionally museums were ivory towers. They had very highly educated people who claimed superior knowledge and unique command of certain subjects. And what we have learned over time is we're only richer by bringing to the table other voices than our own, and particularly when it comes to delicate matters. Right now, our Art of America's galleries for the 18th century have been closed. To commemorate the 250th anniversary, they will reopen on June 19th. And there's a reason we turned down federal funding. We wanted to be able to tell stories that are complex, nuanced, and sometimes even ambiguous. We wanted to make sure that we brought a lot of contributions from outside our own walls to this project. And I think it's a template. So this is more or less an invitation to co-develop, to co-create something, and not necessarily just to, for me to say, I signal my interest and here's something that we have. Collaborations also include working with other organizations. So I had the pleasure, I saw Jason, who's somewhere at the Armenian Museum in here. I got a magnificent tour. I was so impressed with the work of the museum, with the quality of the collections and the passion and energy with which this museum is moving forward. So I'm asking myself, how can we be more of a resource for our partners here in Watertown and elsewhere? And so it's not always doing things at the MFA for ourselves, how we can be doing things together.
For a few questions from the audience. So I do have another microphone, but it's a new system, so I think it might be better. Oh yes, if my engineer friend can help, he'll set that up so we can. I was afraid I would do it if I was. Okay, why don't you start with your first question? If you want to go. While he sets up the microphone, use this one.
Thank you. Because of where I live, I go to Peabody Essex Museum all the time, and you said something that caught my ear that I think they do well, but I'm curious how MFA can do it, which is you mentioned cultural islands, that the galleries are geographically specific, and so I think Peabody Essex does a good idea of mixing media, mixing time frames around a theme rather than around the geography. How easy or hard is it to rearrange the galleries and do that?
It's extremely hard and extremely expensive. However, it does not need to be always a wholesale reinstallation. We're exploring, we're piloting this idea. There's currently an exhibition closing soon, June 28th, called Framing Nature, and it's called Garden and Imaginations. The idea that garden is something that we have experienced, but it's also something we aspire to symbolically, metaphysically. And we drew from our deep permanent collection works from anywhere from Pompeii to the 21st century to explore what the garden has meant to so many cultures and to artists in particular who drew inspiration from the garden. So that could, you say there's no rhyme or reason, but we structured the narrative with very specific focal points. We had too many objects, we handpicked the ones that work best for us. And so certainly in the context of exhibitions, we want to do more of that. The Los Angeles County Museum of Art had recently reopened, and they decided that instead of focusing on land masses, which is usually the assumption, so where's Europe? Let's do a European suite of galleries. What about Asia? They focus on oceans and waterways, and are thinking those are great connectors. And so how can we present art in a way that is connected by bodies of water? So I haven't had a chance to go into this. It's recently opened. I'm very intrigued about how that works. And in Lyon, in France, there's a museum of confluences. And so I think I want to educate myself a little more about how physically that looks like. How do you actually create this juxtaposition so you don't have this segmentation, which is helpful in the book. You want to have chapters in the book. But I think as an experience, sometimes that limits what you can do with the art that we have.
Yes, why don't you get the microphone from there?
Thank you. I have a store, and I think it was around 11 months ago. Two women walked in, and then they said, "Oh, this is Armenian store. We're just around the corner. We saw Armenian Lavash store," and we walked in, and then they said, "We have a new director." So they were from Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And I said, "Wow, that's interesting." And then I did some research on you right away that evening and found out about your background, which is very interesting. You mentioned that you grew up in an area in France that was not that Armenian. So I think you ended up in one of the very unique Armenian community, because I think Fresno and Boston are unique in their sense that as an Armenian community. And I think you're in luck now, and we're glad to have you here. I don't know how long you're going to be staying here. Hopefully we can maximize your presence here. And my question is, can you tell us a little bit more about how did you end up in the US? Because there is Louvre, there are so many museums in France, right?
Yes.
And then you ended up not only in the US, but in Boston, of course.
Yes.
You can tell that transition and what Louvre means to you, basically.
So there are two things. One is a cultural one. So I went to law school, business school, and during my military service, I did a degree in history because I had by that time figured out I wanted to be in the cultural sector. And I thought I would not be taken seriously if I had no culture. But that was a veneer. That was not very deep. That was the best I could do to position myself as somebody who would be relevant. Well, in France, I was maybe 24 when I finished all these degrees. Everybody said, "You're such a confused person. We can't see a profile emerging. You're not going to accept anybody's authority. You're dilettante." Truly, I interviewed for all kinds of jobs. Right? We don't really see a future for you here. In the United States, everybody asked me, "Can you do the job?" They didn't ask me so much about where I came from. They asked me, "Can you do this?" So I speak German, among other things, which was absolutely critical for my field. And so there was a completely different mentality. So that's one thing that brought me to the United States. The other thing that brought me to the United States is France is very centralized. And the Minister of Culture, Jacques Lannes, created a national school for curators, which is mandatory. And you have to take a test. When you study art history, you take a test, you get into school, and then you graduate. And depending on your ranking, they decide which museum you go to. So you can be a specialist of porcelain, and you end up in the Michelin Museum of Tires because of your ranking when you take the test. I wanted to be an arms and armor curator. That's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to do something else. And on top of that, there was an age limit by which you had to graduate from that school. I was obsolete the moment that school was created. I was already too old to enter the school and graduate from it. So I looked around and said, clearly I cannot do this in France. And the European Union was a thing at the time, but you had to be a civil servant in most museums in other European countries, and therefore you had to be a national. A French person could not work in Germany. A French person could not work in Great Britain back in when I was looking, 1980s. So I moved to the US. And I had a friend who was studying macroeconomics at NYU, and I was finished my military service. I said, don't take a job right now, just come and spend a couple of weeks in New York City. I went to the Metropolitan Museum and said, how do you get a job in this thing? And they said, you should go to Philadelphia. They were looking for someone, they gave up. And that's how it happened.
I'm Mary Baruchian, and I'm very pleased that Martin's work is now part of the museum. In addition to that, the museum had selected 35 of his prints many years ago, so he would be so thrilled to realize now they have one of his oil paintings too. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm so glad you mentioned the works on paper as well.
Yes. Yes, Ken. You could take this.
DNA question. Have you done a DNA test and have you connected to any Terjanians in Massachusetts? We know them.
No, so maybe I've been a bit sloppy here. One of my sisters did the test. So I thought, that's probably good enough. But I could take the test because it's a lottery, right? I may have a very different DNA. I have not met any Terjanians or Terjanians in Massachusetts, but historically I've been in touch with some in Canada. Yeah, in Canada.
Well, they're in Worcester and Whiteman too.
Oh, okay, well, so on my to-do list, yes.
So my question is, what new programs and major exhibitions can we look forward to?
How much time do we have?
For the next 3 years.
So you won't be disappointed if you like impressionist paintings. So we're going to do a Renoir exhibition, which is currently in the Musée d'Orsay, and then went to the National Gallery. It's Renoir and love. It's about how Renoir was interested in relationships and affection. And while I saw it at the Musée d'Orsay, it was very spectacular there. There are some works there that are not coming to us, but there are works that are coming to us that didn't get. So you will have something that you can only get.
When might that be? When might that be?
I'm terrible with dates, but it's coming very soon. I have a professional help here. I have a colleague who can give us the dates. I can get back to you.
Valentine's Day.
Valentine's Day. Okay, we have an exhibition that is also going to open. I'm super excited about, which is called Unbound, and it's about major Spanish artists of the 20th century, Picasso, Dali, Miro, and there are a few others. And we recently discovered that the greatest sandbox for these artists was not sculpture, was not printmaking, and it was not painting. That if they gave them free time, the thing they would really invest in is a unfamiliar type of art that only has a French name. That's okay by me. It's called the Livre d'Artiste. And the Livre d'Artiste is not an artist's books. They're sort of albums of text combined with images. Picasso did more than 250 of those during that. And it would be very controlling. They chose the paper. They worked with typographers. They would work on the text. And those things would typically not be sold. They would be presented to one another artist, to gallerists, to collectors. And it's sort of neither books nor prints. So neither libraries nor art museums have had significant collections of this. And those works have not been part of the canon of art history. The story has basically virtually untold. And so we're opening an exhibition to say, voila, we're introducing the genre. We have beautiful, beautiful examples. They're all different. Even the binding matters a great deal. And this is a private collection, the first tranche of gifts to the museum. And there's going to be much more. You would have Chagall, and so many others were working in Paris at the time. It's in my view, like the beginning of a sort of rolling schedule of exhibitions. I will talk to that. Suzanne Jackson, I mean, we have much more coming. But we're also working long-term on big exhibition, international exhibition project. We're working on something that works for mainland China coming into the MFA. And we have also a big Egyptian exhibition called Maverick Kings, which is going to be about the notion that ancient Egyptian art is not immutable, it's not so conservative. There's actually a lot of room to change what Egyptian art looks like and feels like. And we'll illustrate the point with 3 rulers, including one woman pharaoh, who decided to shape the image of themselves and their power. And they say, from now on, everything that we used to do is over. And they would work with the artists to reimagine portraiture, again, representation of the power. So some of them were disliked, and their works would be destroyed by the next pharaohs. So we're going to have fragments and shards and reconstructed works. But it's a really interesting story how within the 18th dynasty, 3 pharaohs were able to completely turn around the representation of power.
Thank you.
Hello, and welcome again to Boston.
Thank you.
I grew up here in Massachusetts, and one of the things we had was the opportunity to not only take field trips to the museum, but for the museum, I recall coming to our schools. And I haven't had the opportunity to experience that since that time, but is that still part of your mission, or do you think it needs to be revived? Or I know it's tough because there's so much on your plate, but bringing the museum out to the schools or having interaction, because it's such a underinvested area right now in general within education. Thank you.
Thank you. So currently we have the reverse model, which is we encourage schools to come to the museum, and we even can pay for the busing and other related expenses to make it easier. It's very hard for us to bring the original art to the schools, which is not to say that we cannot bring great experiences to schools where they are. In general, if you want to do great work with the community, and that includes children, you have to meet them where they are, right? At least needs to start there. The problem, I think we would say, is that we have a structural deficit, and the scale of the effort that we needed to reach everyone, because we don't want to pick and choose. We really want to do it for everyone. So right now we're doing concentric circles. We're really exploring within Boston all these different neighborhoods and these parts that we have historically had ties to, but we could do more. We're trying to also invite teachers to come to us and articulate better what their needs are. And we offer training workshops, and it's a very good question, because I think I personally did career days going to my kids' schools, right? You go in and talk about what you do, and it's just so different for them to see you come to them where they are, and I think it's very promising for us if we can do that. That at some point was called outreach, and some museum even had branches in the 1970s, and that became contested, patronizing, that you would go out. And I think that moment is over, where you say, oh, that's a form of colonization, and you come. And so I'm hopeful that all these negative associations are over, and that's much more, again, about the idea of reciprocity. Why would we expect everybody to come to the museum if the museum can also be out of its own walls? So right now we're thinking more about, again, partnerships. How can it be in parks? How can it be participating in festivals? Recently we had the Triennial, which is a sculpture project across Boston. But yes, the schools is a very important audience, because the visitors of tomorrow are in waiting, and the parents might take them to the museum, but it's no substitute for the more direct contact.
Please don't forget about the Armenian Heritage Park.
Absolutely, I'm not about to forget about it. And the beauty about it is, obviously, it's a place for everyone. It speaks to a very large human experience.
I have a related question. I'm all the way in the back. My name is Eliana. I'm the Executive Director of the Mosesian Center for the Arts here in Watertown. And we're very much a community space. We have 2 beautiful galleries. We have art exhibitions that rotate every 5 to 7 weeks. Many artists come through our doors in varying ways. We have artists in residence. How do you see the MFA or institutions like the MFA in relationship to the regional counterparts?
That is a very difficult question because it looks like you have everything that you need. It's just the way you presented it. You know, you got a rolling installation, you have no shortage of art, you have artists going through your walls. So what I would need from you is like, how could we enhance what you're already doing so well? And is it that you need art that we have in store? Is it that we have other artists that don't come to Watertown and we can mediate some of these things? Is it about bringing also the curators who can be very inspirational when they get excited and they talk about their work? But I would like you to grab the mic again and tell me, because in truth, I don't know that every school and every program will have or every gallery has the same needs. We have a program, for example, to share Netherlandish art with college museums and university museums. And what we're finding out is every professor who wants to teach their students using original works of art that we provide, they have completely different ambitions. They want to teach their way, they want to do it interdisciplinary, or they want to go deep dive on one particular artist, and their facilities are different. So I think it's a case-by-case study, truly, and I think that's where we guarantee to be successful. The one-size-fits-all is very challenging.
Well, I have I don't have all the answers, but I have one small example. One of your curators, Laila Bermeo, is local to the area and helped us select some of our artists in residence as part of the panel. I think little things like that make a big difference for local organizations and for the curators that work for the larger institutions to be more rooted in the community in that way. Certainly if there was space in the curators to be able to do it, we would welcome a collaborative curation or something like that, or even a panel or a talk.
Thank you. Well, I think our curators are always happy to talk. And I think what you describe is deeply interpersonal. You have here a Watertown resident who happens to be a curator and who wanted to contribute to the community. The question is, how do you get to the next level where have somebody who lives in the South End comes to Watertown to do more of the same? We had recently a great exhibition called Rachel Roche, which was about a woman painter of still lifes. And one of the great things about it was that her still lifes features plants that were not known in the Netherlands. They were from all of the Dutch colonial empire. They actually couldn't blossom at the same time, so it was impossible for them to be in the same vase. But we learned so much about the plants and this fabrication and the symbolism of it because the curator's son was going to the same kindergarten as the child of a Harvard professor who specialized in plants. And it's on the playground that they develop this partnership. So sometimes there's the institutional pathway, right? Where you talk to the director says, we're launching this new program. But truly, the thing is also about open-mindedness and being present. And the beauty of what came about with this is that it gives us almost an idea of how we could institutionalize what was just a happy accident. Mm-hmm. So hopefully we can do more what Leila has been doing for you in a more institutional way.
Hello, my name is Ahmed Bugaticha. 40-some-odd years ago, I graduated with an electrical engineering degree, somewhat like you were doing. But the only books that remain on my bookshelf today are from the one art class I took in Chinese art, because it sort of still stuck with me, and I still visually feel something from that class where I do not ask me to do an integral today, because I can't. But so, as someone like myself who goes maybe into near retirement, we just became members last year of the museum, and how does somebody with no skill in the arts but wants to get involved in the museum do so? How do you get into that door at the museum?
So, thank you. We talked about technology. At times, AI may be our friend. There are so many lectures at the MFA. There's so many opportunities to actually see original content, whether it's in relation to an exhibition that we have, or it's about the permanent collection. I would encourage you to find ways to be, you may not have the leisure to do it during the day, but we even have evening programs, weekend programs, to be present, and then if you already have a pre-existing interest in Chinese art, we recently hired a curator of Chinese paintings, who is very inspiring. So seek those connections. We have something we call the Curator Circle. You need to be a member at a certain level, but the Curator Circle means you're part of the inner circle where you get to spend time with all of the curators, you hear about the projects, you become an insider. That's one of the ways. I think there are many others. One other way is actually to meet other people who are sort of like-minded, have interest. The Curator Circle is one of the ways you can do it, but we also organize trips. And joining a trip is one of the ways you can really build like fellowship with other people, otherwise you might have not met. And we do have small exhibition, but really wonderful publications, and they're always like a new portal. So right where we have an exhibition, Chinese quilts. Not everybody has heard about the quilt making tradition of China, but it's a real thing. And the publication I just learned on our way here, won a sort of gold medal for an award for how good it is. The curator would be so happy to talk more about these. So sometimes also, you follow an exhibition, you read a bit about it, you have questions. Most of my colleagues tell me that they're surprised when somebody wants to learn more about what they do or to read about art. They cannot be everywhere all at once, but there are all kinds of fields or niche areas in which they work, and they see it as a greatest compliment that someone wants to engage.
How could we, let's say I want to invite your specialist in Urartian art, I assume you have ancient Near East curators. How would one go about that? That might actually be something we could have if people are interested for the future.
I think where I sit, you could just have a direct line to the museum, but should I not be here, we're on vacation. You do actually have the ability to call the department, and there's a coordinator who asks you about it. There's always something on the way, and one thing that is very invisible but so important is you cannot have a world-class collection and be one of the top museums in the world in certain areas, and not have every scholar in the world wanting to see some things in storage. So our ancient Near Eastern art department, which is also the same one as ancient Egyptian, ancient Nubian, every week there are people coming through their walls to ask to see something as part of a research project. Some of them are local, but some of them are international. They would be delighted, those experts who are not residents, probably to give a lecture in conjunction with the time they're spending in Boston. So it might just be a matter of like, one that would be somebody even beyond our own staff coming through our walls, and could we plan ahead and mobilize that opportunity and bring the person here. So I think those possibilities are very real, but they're not visible because all this work is within those scholarly networks of peers who just call each other.
Might take you up on that. You have a couple more questions.
I was curious because you mentioned your expertise in arms and armor and like that being your driving force to get into the field that you're in. I was curious about how you are balancing the position that you are in now, which sort of there's an obligation to have a wider breadth of expertise and like understanding, with just like your passion, and how much do you pour into that cup of what you're interested in versus what you're expected to?
The answer is I have a good marriage. So, for Christmas, my wife surprised me with the gift that I might be able to go do some arms and armor stuff on my vacation time, and she would tag along. That's pretty special. Seriously, I have to give up on the notion that I would be doing much, but the Worcester Art Museum recently reopened their arms and armor galleries, and they asked me if I would be willing to give a lecture. I said, I'm the director of the MFA. I'm not an arms and armor person anymore, but I realized I've been associated with Worcester Art Museum for 14 years. I guided the transfer from the Hague Zonnery to the Worcester Art Museum. I helped them select what to keep and what to deaccession. I spoke to the trustee of the Worcester Art Museum telling them Arms Number can be art and that it should take the collection. So I couldn't say no. I had to go and put in a good word for the reopening of that gallery. So from time to time I still contribute. I had an article that was recently published in the Bulletin of the Detroit Institute of Art, because I'm the only person who knew that object that they are borrowing and that was in an exhibition, and they said, can you please do this? So yes, I regret it later when I say yes, but it keeps me going. I still am a scholar, and while now sometimes I feel it's more like cultural heritage or the roles of institutions in an ever-evolving world, I haven't completely given up on my original trade. I'm just realistic. I don't need a lot of sleep, and I do a few hours here and there.
Lucky you. Maybe two more questions?
I just wanted to ask, I just wanted to congratulate the museum on their outreach to the community. I know Mayor Wu has done the museum initiative, and I know for holidays, people can come, Martin Luther King Day, the upcoming Juneteenth, and I think it's wonderful. And I didn't know if there were more free admission days planned. I think it's a wonderful way to engage the community and to get them, into the building, so then they'll be repeat visitors.
So you have the days that were free, but typically national holidays. June 20th, the reopening of our new American galleries for the 18th century. The museum is free for all residents in Massachusetts. We have every third Thursday of the month, $5 after 5. So it's not free, but it's much more affordable. And we are always looking for sponsors to underwrite more free access to our programs. There are the resources that enable you to get to the museum for less. On the other hand, I would say, in my view, the urgency is to lower the economic barriers, but at the same time to make sure that what we do is relevant and speaks to our audience. So it's not just about making it free. I've been to a lot of museums in Great Britain that are pretty much all free. They're just deserted. So they're free, but nobody's going. And so it's not enough to be cheaper or free. Obviously, when we're free, we see long lines, and it makes us very happy to see how much interest there is in coming to the museum. But we also need to keep working on how to make the museum a true destination, a must-see destination, not just for tourists, but for our residents, for our neighbors. And part of that is leveraging this beautiful permanent collection that we have, and making it even more meaningful.
Maybe one more question.
Can I just say that in probably over 30 years of being involved in the arts, this is one of the most interesting and enjoyable panels I think I've ever been to in my career as an art historian. I did want to ask, though, I want to put on my teacher hat and ask about what are the opportunities. I teach museum studies, I teach artists, art historians who want to go into the museum field. What are going to be these opportunities if there are these fiscal challenges? What do I tell my students? I do know, for instance, I had a student who worked at the Museum of Contemporary, who volunteered to take coats at openings at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, and within 4 years was the director of personnel. So I know that you go, you're dependable, and sometimes you work your way in. But what would I tell my students who are interested in museum studies and want to go into museum fields?
It's a big question. If the question is how could they gain valuable experience in a museum setting, the MFA was one of the first museums to secure funding to create paid internships. Our Pathways program, we're very, very proud of it. It's one of the largest programs in the country. We have students coming from community colleges. We have students coming from the more familiar highbrow colleges in Boston and Cambridge. But really, the value of the program is that they're not just embedded in the departments and their function, but they work with one another and they learn from one another. We have hired alumni from those programs. I myself, in my previous role as Chief of Curatorial Affairs and Conservation, hired my executive assistant, who was a former intern in the Art of the Baikars department. So these things have a way of snowballing and creating opportunities, but it's true that there are only so many spots. I think it's very important early on to get as close as possible to the real work, because it's very easy to romanticize what it's like to work in a museum. When I was a curator of Arms and Armor in my early days, I could not believe how often I had to deal with burnt light bulbs in the cases and call somebody and be there to open the case, could change and remove the racks and then vacuum the case. I thought I was going to do art history. Sometimes it's a humbling experience, but if you see that all of this adds up into something that you're passionate about, then you know it's right for you. If you're thinking more about access to collections, we have been trying to be as open as we can with providing direct access to, for example, a collection of photographs and prints. We have a study room. It's possible to make an appointment, bring students. Here again, we have a little bit of bandwidth. We're victims of our own success. I'm being told we have one of the 10 best and largest collection of prints in the world. So a lot of people, everybody wants to see our prints, including the famous ones. But we're trying to open the museum up because they're light sensitive, and the chances that are going to be on the museum walls are pretty low. So many can only be experienced if you go see them in person. So if your students want also this direct contact with objects, when the Philadelphia Museum of Art hired me, they made a bet. They were deeply concerned that I may be a documents person who would like archives and names, but not understand objects. The fact that they can be altered, the fact that they've been transmitted, the fact how they're put together. And it turns out I had a great mentor, and I really learned how to work with hands-on experience. A lot of the art education can be removed from objects, certainly in art history. So this is a value that we can bring to students, is to invite them to spend more time. Many of our curators try to host groups, and sometimes it's only in the galleries, but they will zero in on things that are not necessarily visible. Have I answered your question?
So what do you think, everyone? Was this a great... Yes. That's to relax afterwards, and then there's a little book also on art and history. So thank you very much. We had a very distinguished audience. We had heads of a number of different museums, directors, and artists, and so forth. So it's an opportunity to mingle a little bit, enjoy the reception. And if you want to support us, as I said, we have some nice events coming up in the fall as well. We welcome that. So thank you again. And,